Hello everyone and welcome back to Shadow Man Stories. I can picture some of you already in bed, maybe some of you just getting home from work. Wherever you are, whatever time it is, I'm glad you're here. If this helps you relax or sleep, please like and subscribe. It means a lot. Now, let's get you comfortable, and I'll tell you tonight's story. My name is Thomas Stormcrow, and I've been a ranger on the Blue Ridge Parkway for 15 years. In all that time, I thought I'd seen everything these mountains could throw at me. I was wrong. It was November 15th, 1965, when the call came in. 6 experienced climbers had gone missing on Grandfather Mountain. The weather was turning nasty, with snow clouds building up over the peaks. Time was running out. I knew the missing team's leader, Dr. Marcus Webb. He was one of those fancy college professors who thought he could conquer any mountain with the right equipment and planning. Webb had been documenting new climbing routes all summer. His team included his graduate student Sarah, 2 local climbing guides, and a couple from Virginia who'd climbed all over the world. They should have been back 2 days ago. I loaded my rescue gear into the truck and drove up the winding mountain road as far as it would go. The last 12 miles to their planned campsite would have to be on foot. Above the tree line, Grandfather Mountain rose like a sleeping giant, its knife-edge ridges cutting into the gray sky. The wind was already picking up. My Cherokee grandmother used to say this mountain was alive, that it could think and feel. Growing up, I'd laughed at her old stories. Now, at 39, with more rescues under my belt than I cared to count, I knew mountains could kill you in 100 different ways. But they weren't alive. They were just rock and ice and weather. At least that's what I told myself as I hiked up the trail. The first thing I noticed was how quiet everything was. No birds, no squirrels chattering in the trees. Even the wind seemed muffled, like the mountain was holding its breath. My boots crunched on frozen leaves as I climbed higher, following the path the climbing team would have taken. I found their base camp just before sunset. 2 tents, perfectly set up. Guy lines tight and stakes secure. But no people. Their gear was scattered around the campsite in a way that made my skin crawl. Not random, like animals had gotten into it. Organized, like someone had arranged it on purpose. The climbing ropes were coiled in perfect spirals. The carabiners hung from tree branches in neat rows. Even their food was laid out in patterns I didn't recognize but somehow felt familiar, like something from my grandmother's stories about Cherokee ceremonies. I called out their names until my throat was raw. The only answer was my own echo bouncing off the granite cliffs above. That's when I saw the footprints. They were pressed deep into a patch of muddy ground near the camp. But these weren't boot prints from any of the missing climbers. These were bare feet, massive bare feet, easily 18 inches long with deep toe impressions that looked almost human but wrong somehow. The stride between prints was at least 4 feet. I knelt down and touched one of the prints. The mud was frozen solid, but the print was perfectly preserved. Whatever had made it was heavy enough to sink deep into ground that would barely show my boot prints. I pulled out my radio to call for backup, but all I got was static. That happened sometimes up here when the weather was bad. I'd have to hike back down to get a signal. As I stood up, something made me look toward the ridge above. For just a second, I thought I saw a figure silhouetted against the darkening sky. Tall, impossibly tall. It seemed to be walking along the ridgeline where no human could possibly go. The rocks there were nearly vertical, with 1,000-foot drops on both sides. I blinked, and it was gone. My hands were shaking as I packed up some of the team's gear as evidence. The Cherokee in me wanted to run. The ranger in me knew I had a job to do. 6 people were missing, and a storm was coming. But as I started back down the trail, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me from the ridges above. Something big enough to leave 18-inch footprints in frozen mud. Something that could walk where no human being had any right to walk. I was back on the mountain at first light with a full search team. 3 other rangers, 2 local climbing guides who knew these peaks better than their own backyards, and a helicopter crew on standby. The weather had cleared overnight, but that just made the mountain look more dangerous. The granite ridges gleamed like knife blades in the morning sun. My partner Jake looked at the footprint casts I'd made the night before and shook his head. "Could be a hoax," he said. "You know how college kids are." Maybe they're playing some kind of prank. I wanted to agree with him, but I'd seen Dr. Webb's climbing record. The man was serious about his work, maybe too serious. He wasn't the type to waste time on pranks, especially not with a storm coming. We split into teams and started searching the climbing routes Webb's group had planned to document. The helicopter crew radioed that they were having trouble with their instruments. The compass was spinning wildly, and the radio kept cutting out when they got close to the peak. That should have been our first real warning. I was leading a team up the eastern approach when we found Sarah's backpack. It was hanging from a tree branch about 12 feet off the ground, like someone had just tossed it up there. But the tree was a good 50 yards away from any climbing route. There was no way it had gotten there by accident. Inside the pack, we found Sarah's journal. The last entry was dated 3 days ago, the day they'd disappeared. Her handwriting got shakier as the entry went on. Dr. Webb insists we can reach the summit by sunset, but something feels wrong about this place. The Cherokee guide in town warned us not to climb during the new moon, said this mountain has a guardian spirit that doesn't like visitors. Webb laughed, but I keep hearing footsteps on the rocks above us, even when we're all together. And the birds have gone completely silent. The journal entry ended mid-sentence, like she'd stopped writing suddenly. We kept climbing. An hour later, we found more of their gear. A sleeping bag rolled up tight and wedged into a crack in the rock face 30 feet up a vertical cliff. Climbing hardware arranged in neat patterns on flat rocks. A water bottle sitting perfectly balanced on a ledge so narrow I couldn't figure out how it had gotten there without falling. It was like someone, or something, was leaving us a trail to follow. The Cherokee climbing guide with our team, an old man named Joseph Crow Feather, got quieter the higher we climbed. Finally, he stopped walking altogether. "This is far enough," he said, his voice tight with worry. "What do you mean?" I asked. "We haven't found them yet." Joseph pointed to a line of stone cairns that hadn't been there the day before. Someone had stacked rocks into tall pillars overnight, marking a path that led straight up toward the most dangerous part of the mountain. "Those are boundary markers," Joseph said. "The ridge walker put them there. He's telling us to stay back." "The ridge walker?" Jake laughed. "Come on, Joseph. We don't have time for ghost stories." But I was looking at those cairns, and my grandmother's stories were coming back to me. Stories about a giant Cherokee warrior who guarded the sacred peaks. Stories I'd tried to forget. "Who's the ridge walker?" I asked. Joseph's face was grim. "The guardian of this mountain. Cherokee legend says he appears when people climb without respect, without permission. He leads them away from the sacred places. Some he brings back, some he keeps." "Keeps for what?" I asked. But Joseph just shook his head and started walking back down the trail. We should have followed him. Instead, we kept climbing, following the trail of gear and those impossible cairns. The path led us higher and higher toward places where the rock was so steep and broken that only expert climbers could go. But the cairns kept appearing perfectly balanced, showing us the way. As we climbed, I started hearing things, footsteps on solid rock somewhere above us, the cry of eagles when the sky was empty. And once I swear I heard Sarah calling for help, her voice echoing off the cliffs from a direction where there was nothing but empty air and a 1,000-foot drop. We found Dr. Webb's climbing helmet balanced on a rock ledge that jutted out from the main cliff face. There was no way to reach it without technical climbing gear and at least an hour of setup. But there it sat, like someone had just placed it there as a message. The sun was starting to set and the temperature was dropping fast. We had to make a decision: keep following the trail of gear higher into the danger zone or retreat and wait for better conditions. That's when we heard the singing. It was coming from somewhere up near the peak, a low chanting in a language I didn't recognize but somehow understood in my bones. Cherokee ceremonial songs, the kind my grandmother had hummed when she thought no one was listening. But there were 6 voices singing together, and they didn't sound quite human anymore. Jake grabbed his radio and tried to call the helicopter, but all we got was static and what sounded like that same chanting coming through the speaker. The sky was clear, but our instruments were going crazy. Compasses spinning, GPS units showing impossible locations. "We need to get out of here," Jake said. And for the first time since I'd known him, he sounded scared. I looked up toward the peak one more time. The singing was getting louder, and I could swear I saw movement up there. A figure walking along the ridge where no human could possibly survive. A figure that looked way too big to be human. We should have left the mountain that night. Should have called in more help, waited for better weather, done anything except what we actually did, which was camp at the tree line and wait for dawn. But 6 people were missing, and I couldn't shake the feeling that time was running out. Not just because of the cold, but because of something else. Something that made my Cherokee blood sing with warnings I didn't want to understand. I dreamed that night. Dreamed I was walking up a path I'd never seen before, but somehow knew by heart. In the dream, my great-grandfather was waiting for me at the top of the mountain. He was wearing traditional Cherokee clothing and holding an eagle feather. "Tommy," he said in Cherokee, a language I'd never learned but understood perfectly in the dream. "The mountain is calling you home." When I woke up, I was standing outside my tent in bare feet, looking up at the peak. The stone cairns glowed silver in the moonlight, marking a path that seemed to call to something deep in my bones. Jake was already awake, sitting by our dead campfire. "You feel it too?" he asked. I nodded. Neither of us could explain what it was, but it was there, a pull toward the upper reaches of the mountain, like we were being drawn by invisible strings. At dawn, we started climbing again. This time, we were joined by Joseph Crow Feather's nephew, a young Cherokee man named David who knew the old stories better than anyone. He'd hiked up during the night to find us. "My uncle sent me," David said. "He's worried the Ridge Walker has taken your missing people for the spirit trial." "What spirit trial?" I asked. "Cherokee warriors used to come to this mountain for vision quests," David explained as we climbed. "They'd fast and pray until the mountain spirits showed them their life path. But sometimes, if they weren't ready or didn't show proper respect, the Ridge Walker would take them to test their worthiness." "Test them how?" Jake asked. David pointed to the stone cairns that still marked our path. "He makes them walk the spirit trail. If they pass the test, they become guardians of the sacred places. If they fail—" He didn't finish the sentence. We found more gear as we climbed higher. But now, it wasn't just scattered. It was arranged in patterns that David recognized as Cherokee ceremonial designs. Prayer wheels made from climbing rope, sacred symbols spelled out with carabiners and pitons, and the footprints were everywhere, those massive 18-inch bare footprints, pressed deep into solid rock like the stone was soft mud. They led higher and higher toward places where the climbing got so technical that even expert mountaineers would need hours to rig proper safety systems. But the prints went straight up the vertical faces like whoever made them was just walking on level ground. "How big is this Ridge Walker supposed to be?" I asked David. "The stories say he's 12 feet tall," David replied, "made of living stone, with the spirit of every Cherokee warrior who ever died protecting the sacred places." We were getting close to something. I could feel it in my bones, in the Cherokee blood I'd tried to ignore for most of my life. The mountain was alive around us. I could hear it breathing in the wind, feel its heartbeat in the rock under my hands. That's when we found the first of the missing climbers. Marcus Webb was sitting cross-legged on a narrow ledge about 60 feet up a sheer cliff face. His eyes were open, but he wasn't seeing us. He was chanting in Cherokee, rocking back and forth, completely unaware that he was sitting on a ledge where one wrong move would mean a 1,000-foot fall. "Dr. Webb?" I called out. "Can you hear me?" He didn't respond, just kept chanting in a language he shouldn't have known, in a voice that sounded deeper than it should have been. Jake started rigging ropes to reach him, but David grabbed his arm. "Don't," he said. "If you interrupt the spirit trial, you could kill him." "He's going to fall," Jake protested. "The Ridge Walker won't let him fall," David said with certainty I wish I shared. "Look at where he's sitting." I looked closer and felt my blood turn cold. Webb was sitting on a ledge that should have crumbled under his weight, but somehow, impossibly, the rock was holding. More than that, it looked like the stone had been shaped to cradle him, like the mountain itself was keeping him safe. We found Sarah an hour later, balanced on a rock spire that rose from the main cliff like a needle. She was standing with her arms spread wide, singing a Cherokee prayer song to the sky. There was no way she could have climbed up there without equipment, and no way she could be standing there without falling. But there she was, untouchable and unreachable, her voice echoing off the granite walls. "They're all in spirit trance," David explained. "The Ridgewalker is testing them, showing them visions, teaching them the sacred ways of the mountain." "For how long?" I asked. David's face was grim. "Until they learn what they need to learn, or until their bodies give out." We found the other 4 climbers scattered across the upper reaches of the mountain, each one in an impossible location, each one chanting or singing in Cherokee. They'd been there for 3 days without food or water, exposed to freezing temperatures and mountain winds. By all rights, they should have been dead. But they weren't just alive. They looked healthy, peaceful, like they were exactly where they were supposed to be. "This is crazy," Jake muttered. "People can't survive up there." But as he spoke, I saw something that made my heart stop. A figure was moving along the main ridge, silhouetted against the sky. Tall, incredibly tall, walking along edges that were too narrow and steep for any human. The Ridgewalker. Even at a distance, I could see he was massive, easily 12 feet tall, with broad shoulders and long black hair that streamed behind him in the wind. He moved with impossibles. He grace across terrain that would challenge expert rock climbers, his bare feet finding purchase on vertical stone. As I watched, he turned and looked directly at me, even from half a mile away. I felt the weight of that gaze. Ancient, patient, knowing. And somehow, I understood what he wanted. He wanted me to come to him. That night, against every bit of ranger training I'd ever received, I left base camp alone. Jake and the others thought I was checking the perimeter, but I was really following the stone cairns that led higher up the mountain. The Cherokee blood in my veins was singing, and I couldn't ignore it anymore. The path the cairns marked was impossible. It led straight up cliff faces and across ledges that were barely wide enough for a squirrel. But somehow my feet found holds that shouldn't have been there. My hands gripped edges that felt like they'd been carved just for me. I was climbing like I'd been born to it. And maybe I had been. The Ridgewalker was waiting for me at the summit. Up close, he was even more massive than I'd imagined. 12 feet of living granite, his skin the color of the mountain stone, his hair flowing like water down his broad back. His face was Cherokee, but ancient. Older than any human face should be. His eyes held the wisdom of centuries and the patience of stone. When he spoke, his voice rumbled like distant thunder. "Thomas Stormcrow," he said in Cherokee, and somehow I understood every word. "You have forgotten who you are." "I'm a ranger," I said in English. "I help people." "You are Cherokee," he corrected. "Grandson of Mountain Woman, great-grandson of Eagle Speaker. You are blood of my blood, stone of my stone." The mountain peak around us began to shift and change. I saw it as it had been centuries ago, when Cherokee warriors climbed here for vision quests. I saw my great-grandfather as a young man, fasting and praying on these same rocks. I saw the sacred ceremonies that had blessed this place for generations. And I saw what had been lost when the Cherokee were driven from their ancestral lands, and the sacred places became just another tourist destination for people who didn't understand their power. "The climbers," I said. "What have you done to them?" "I have given them the choice," the Ridgewalker said. "Learn the sacred ways and become protectors of this place, or continue in ignorance and face the consequences of disrespect. They'll die up there. They will die anyway, in time. But here, they can become something greater, guardians of the sacred places, protectors of the old ways." I looked down at the distant figures of the missing climbers, still in their trance states on impossible perches. "And if they refuse?" The Ridgewalker's expression was sad but implacable. "Then they will join the mountain, as all things must in time." The wind picked up, howling across the peak. But through it I could hear other voices. the spirits of Cherokee warriors who had made this same choice over the centuries, guardians who had given up their human lives to protect the sacred places. "What about me?" I asked. "You have the blood," the Ridgewalker said. "You can walk between worlds. You can help your people understand that some places are more than rock and stone. Some places are alive." He gestured toward the mountain below us, and suddenly I could feel it. The vast, ancient consciousness of Grandfather Mountain itself, patient as stone, old as the earth, aware of every creature that walked on its slopes. "The mountain chose you long ago," the Ridgewalker said. "Your grandmother knew. Your great-grandfather knew. They waited for you to remember." Images flooded my mind. Cherokee ceremonies performed on these peaks. Sacred sites that had been protected for generations. The spiritual power that flowed through the mountain like blood through veins. And I saw what was coming if nothing changed. More climbers treating the sacred places like playgrounds. More devils. Opment creeping up the mountainsides. The ancient power fading as the last of the old ways died out. "I can't abandon my job," I said. "I can't abandon the people I help." "You can help them. Better," the Ridgewalker said. "Teach them to respect the sacred places. Show them how to climb with honor. Be the bridge between the old ways and the new." The storm clouds that had been building all day suddenly opened up and snow began to fall. But it wasn't ordinary snow. It was warm, gentle, like being embraced by the mountain itself. In that snowfall, I saw my choice clearly. I could go back to being just a ranger, rescuing people from mountains I treated as nothing more than dangerous terrain. The missing climbers would die of exposure within hours, and the Ridgewalker would wait for the next group of disrespectful visitors. Or I could accept what I was, Cherokee, guardian, protector of sacred places, and help build a bridge between the ancient ways and the modern world. "If I agree," I said, "will you let them go? The missing climbers." The Ridgewalker smiled, and it was like sunrise on the mountain peaks. "They have already begun to learn. The choice will be theirs." I looked down at the lights of the rescue camp far below, where Jake and the others were probably wondering where I'd gone. Then I looked at the ancient stone face of the Ridgewalker, who had been protecting this sacred place since before my people were forced from their homeland. "What do I have to do?" I asked. The Ridgewalker placed one massive stone hand on my shoulder, and suddenly I could feel the heartbeat of the mountain, the flow of spiritual power through the sacred sites, the responsibility of protecting places that were more than just rock and earth. "Learn," he said simply. "Remember, protect." The snow swirled around us, and when it cleared, I was standing alone on the summit. But I wasn't alone. I could feel the Ridgewalker's presence and the presence of all the guardians who had come before. They were part of the mountain now, and the mountain was part of me. When I to my way back down to base camp, I found the missing climbers sitting around our fire, alive and well, but changed. They spoke quietly about visions they'd had, about understanding the sacredness of the place they'd been climbing. Dr. Webb approached me as the others were sharing their stories. "Something happened up there," he said quietly. "Something I can't explain. I learned things about this mountain that aren't in any climbing guide." "What kind of things?" I asked, though I already knew. "That some places are more than just rock," he said. "That we need permission to be here. Respect." He looked up toward the peak. "I want to learn more. About the Cherokee connection to this mountain. About doing this right." I smiled and felt the Ridgewalker's approval like warm stone in my chest. "I think I can help with that," I said. The official report said that Dr. Webb's climbing team had been found suffering from altitude sickness and exposure. They'd become disoriented in the changing weather and gotten separated from their camp. It was a plausible explanation that satisfied the bureaucrats and avoided uncomfortable questions about 18-inch footprints and impossible climbing feats. The truth was something different. Over the following weeks, as the climbers recovered, they each came to me privately. They'd all had the same experience: visions of the mountain's sacred history, teachings about Cherokee spiritual practices, and a deep understanding that Grandfather Mountain was more than just a climbing destination. Dr. Webb was the most affected. He scrapped his original climbing guide project and started working with Cherokee historians instead. He wanted to document the sacred sites, not for climbers to conquer, but for people to respect and protect. Sarah changed her major from geology to anthropology. She spent the next summer living with Cherokee families, learning about traditional relationships with the natural world. The other climbers became advocates for what they called spiritual climbing, approaching mountains with respect and ceremony rather than just conquest. But the biggest change was in me. I kept my job as a ranger, but my role expanded. I became the cultural liaison between the Park Service and the Cherokee Nation. I learned the traditional ceremonies from elders like Joseph Crow Feather. I studied my great-grandfather's journals and my grandmother's stories, and I felt the Ridge Walker's presence constantly. Not threatening now, but approving, guiding, teaching. I could sense the spiritual power of the sacred sites. I knew when climbers were approaching with respect versus when they were just looking for another peak to conquer. I could feel the mountain's moods and predict when weather would turn dangerous not just physically, but spiritually. Other rangers started coming to me for advice. "There's something different about you, Tommy," Jake said one day. "Like you understand these mountains in a way the rest of us don't." He wasn't wrong. I'd become a bridge between worlds, modern search and rescue operations and ancient Cherokee wisdom. I helped develop new protocols that required cultural education before issuing climbing permits for certain peaks. I trained other rangers to recognize and respect sacred sites. And sometimes, late at night when the moon was dark, I would climb up to the high places and meet with the Ridge Walker. He taught me about the network of sacred mountains throughout Cherokee territory, about other guardians who protected other peaks, about the responsibility that came with being able to walk between the modern world and the spirit world. "The old ways are not gone," he told me during one of these meetings. "They are sleeping, but they can wake up if there are people willing to remember." More climbers started coming to the mountain with different attitudes. Word spread through the climbing community about the need to approach Grandfather Mountain with much respect. Cherokee ceremonies before attempting difficult climbs, offerings left at sacred sites, permission asked rather than just taken. Not everyone understood, of course, but enough did that the mountain's spiritual presence grew stronger rather than weaker. 3 years after the incident with Dr. Webb's team, I was leading a cultural sensitivity training for new rangers when one of them asked me directly, "Do you really believe in this Cherokee spirit stuff?" I looked out the window toward Grandfather Mountain's peaks, where I knew the Ridge Walker was watching and waiting, where the sacred sites pulsed with ancient power, where my great-grandfather had received his vision and my grandmother had learned her healing songs. "I believe in respecting the places that are sacred to other people," I said, "and I believe that some places have power we don't fully understand." It was a diplomatic answer, but that night I climbed up to the high places again. The Ridge Walker was waiting, massive and patient as always. "You're doing well," he said in Cherokee. "The mountain is pleased." "It's not enough," I said. "There are still climbers who don't understand, still people who see the mountain as just rock." "Change takes time," the Ridge Walker said, "like water wearing away stone. But it happens." He gestured toward the climbing routes below, where I could see the offerings left by respectful climbers. The small cairns built in Cherokee style, the places where people had asked permission before attempting dangerous climbs. "Your people are remembering," he said, "and some of your people's people are learning for the first time." I stayed on Grandfather Mountain for another 15 years. I trained a generation of rangers who understood that their job was protecting not just people, but sacred places. I helped establish the Cherokee Sacred Sites Protection Program, IWACA. Heat as the climbing community slowly, gradually began to approach the mountain with ceremony and respect instead of just conquest. And I felt the Ridge Walker's presence every day, strong and patient and eternal. When I finally retired, it was to a small cabin at the base of the mountain, close enough to feel its spiritual power, close enough to answer when the Ridge Walker called, close enough to continue the work of protecting the sacred places, because some jobs don't end when you turn in your badge. Some responsibilities are deeper than career choices. Some places claim you and once they do, you belong to them forever. The Cherokee have a saying, "We do not inherit the earth from our ancestors, we borrow it from our children." I learned on Grandfather Mountain that the same is true of sacred places. We don't own them, we don't conquer them, we protect them for those who will come after us. And sometimes, if we're lucky, they protect us right back. The ridge walker still walks the high places above the tree line. I see him sometimes, when the light is right and the mountain is quiet. Still 12 feet tall, still made of living stone, still watching over the sacred peak that has been his responsibility for centuries. But now he's not walking alone. Other guardians have joined him, rangers and climbers and Cherokee people who have chosen to serve the mountain rather than simply use it. The sacred places are waking up, the old ways are remembered, and Grandfather Mountain stands patient and eternal, protected by those who understand that some things are more important than reaching the summit. Some things are worth protecting forever. My name is Ezekiel Moonwhisper, and I've been a forest ranger for 21 years. Most folks think that's a funny name for a lawman, but it fits me just fine. I work the deep woods of Daniel Boone National Forest in Kentucky, where the trees grow thick and the hollers run deeper than most people dare to go. It was January 1968 when everything changed. The winter had been brutal that year, with ice storms that knocked out power for weeks and fog so thick you could cut it with a knife. I was sitting in my ranger station, warming my hands around a cup of coffee when the call came in. Moonwhisper? It was Sheriff Collins from town. His voice sounded tight, worried. "We got a problem. 2 ATF agents went missing yesterday in Dark Hollow Creek area. Federal boys are crawling all over my office asking questions." Dark Hollow. I knew that place well. Maybe too well. It was 14 miles from the nearest road, hidden deep in a network of unnamed hollers that most maps didn't even show. My great-grandfather used to tell stories about that place when I was little, stories I tried hard not to believe. "What were they doing out there?" I asked. "Looking for an illegal still, what else? Someone tipped them off about moonshine operations. They radioed in yesterday morning, said they found something. Haven't heard from them since." I set down my coffee. It had gone cold anyway. "I'll head out there first thing in the morning." "Ezekiel," Sheriff Collins said quietly, "you know that place better than anyone. Your family. They got history there." He was right. My great-grandfather, Tobias Moonwhisper, had been a moonshiner back in the 1930s. It was something my family didn't talk about much, especially with me being a lawman now. But I knew the stories. I knew what happened in Dark Hollow in 1932. That night, I packed my gear carefully. Extra batteries for my flashlight. Enough. Food for 3 days. And my service revolver, though I hoped I wouldn't need it. The forecast called for another ice storm moving in, which meant I had maybe 24 hours before the weather made the hollow impossible to reach. I drove out before dawn, my truck's headlights cutting through the fog. The last part of the journey had to be done on foot. I parked at the old logging road and shouldered my pack. The woods were quiet in that wrong way that makes your skin crawl. No bird sounds, no squirrel chatter, just the crunch of my boots on frozen leaves and the sound of my own breathing. The path down to Dark Hollow was steep and treacherous with ice. I'd walked it before, but never in winter. As I got deeper into the woods, something started bothering me. There was a smell in the air, sweet and sharp, like corn mash fermenting. But that was impossible. It was too cold for anything to ferment, and there hadn't been a working still in these woods for decades. At least that's what I told myself. The hollow opened up before me like a wound in the earth. Steep walls on both sides, maybe 60 feet high, covered in bare trees that looked like skeleton fingers reaching for the gray sky. Dark Hollow Creek ran through the middle, mostly frozen over now. And scattered along the creek banks were the ruins, old foundations, rusted metal, broken glass, the remains of the moonshine operation that had been here 36 years ago. I found the ATF agent's car parked at the edge of the creek, doors unlocked, keys still in the ignition. Their equipment was laid out neat and tidy on the hood, radios, notebooks, even their guns. like they'd just stepped away for a minute and planned to come right back. But there were no footprints leading away from the car. The snow around it was smooth and undisturbed except for one set of tracks. Boot prints that led from the car straight to the biggest ruin, the old main still site where my great-grandfather used to work. I followed the tracks, my hand resting on my gun. The smell was getting stronger now, that sweet alcohol smell that made my mouth water, even though I knew it shouldn't be there. And as I got closer to the ruins, I heard something that made my blood turn to ice water. Somebody was working. I could hear the sounds of an active distillery, the bubble and hiss of mash cooking, the drip of condensation, the clink of glass jars. But the stills I was looking at were nothing but rusted metal and broken pipes. I stopped walking and listened hard. The sounds were coming from all around me, like the whole hollow was one big, working distillery. But I could see with my own eyes that everything was cold and dead and broken. That's when I saw the smoke. Thin wisps of white vapor rising from the old stills, even though they hadn't had fires under them for decades. The smoke twisted up into the gray sky like ghostly fingers, and I swear I could smell wood smoke mixing with that corn mash smell. I'd been telling myself for 21 years that the stories about Dark Hollow were just mountain superstition, tales made up to keep revenue agents away from the stills. But standing there in that cold hollow, watching smoke rise from cold metal, I started to think maybe my great-grandfather hadn't been telling tall tales after all. Maybe the boys really were still making shine in Dark Hollow. I stood there for a long time trying to make sense of what I was seeing. The smart thing would have been to go back to my truck and radio for backup. But those two federal agents were somewhere in this hollow, and if they were still alive, they wouldn't last long in this cold. I walked closer to the main still site. The boot prints in the snow led right up to it and then stopped. Just stopped. Like whoever made them had vanished into thin air. But the strange sounds were louder here. The steady drip-drip of liquid, the soft bubble of fermenting mash, and something else. Music. Faint fiddle music, like someone playing an old mountain tune far away. The kind of music my great-grandfather used to play on his front porch when I was little. But there was nobody here, just me and the ruins and that impossible smoke. I called out, "Federal agents! This is Ranger Moonwhisper. Can you hear me?" My voice echoed off the hollow walls and died away. The music stopped. Everything went quiet except for the sound of the creek running under its skin of ice. Then I heard something that made me forget all about being a sensible lawman. A voice, low and gravelly, speaking in the old mountain dialect I remembered from my childhood. "Ain't no federal boys welcome in this hollow, son." I spun around, gun drawn, but there was nobody there. Just the ruins and the smoke and that smell of corn mash that was so strong now it made my eyes water. "Where are they?" I shouted. "Where are the agents?" Laughter echoed around the hollow. Not mean laughter exactly, but not friendly either. The kind of laugh you'd give a child who asked a foolish question. "They're learning to appreciate good mountain whiskey," the voice said. "Same as you're gonna learn, if you got the sense God gave a goose." Something moved in my peripheral vision. I turned and saw a man standing by one of the rusted stills. He was there, and then he wasn't, like a shadow passing in front of a light. But in that brief moment, I saw enough to make my heart pound. He was wearing overalls and a wool coat, the kind of clothes mountain men wore in the 1930s, and there were dark stains on his shirt that looked suspiciously like blood. I blinked hard and looked again. Nothing. Just rusted metal and broken glass. But now there were mason jars lined up on a flat stone near the still, full of clear liquid that definitely hadn't been there a minute before. The jars looked old but clean, and they were sealed with the kind of lids my grandma, used for her canning. I walked over to them, keeping my gun ready. Up close, I could see the liquid inside was pure and clear, with tiny bubbles rising to the surface. It looked exactly like the moonshine my great-grandfather used to make, back before I was born. And he went respectable. One of the jars had a note tucked under it, written on brown paper and pencil. "For Tobias's boy, welcome home." My hands were shaking as I picked up the jar. It was warm to the touch, like it had just come off the still, but that was impossible. Everything here had been cold and dead for decades. I unscrewed the lid and took a careful sniff. The smell hit me like a punch to the face, pure alcohol mixed with something else, something that reminded me of summer corn and mountain honey and wood smoke. It was the best moonshine I'd ever smelled in my life. Without thinking, I took a small sip. It was like drinking liquid fire. The whiskey burned all the way down, but it was a good burn, smooth and clean, and for just a second I could swear I tasted sunshine and mountain air and my great-grandfather's pride in a job well done. Then the world went sideways. The hollow suddenly looked different. The ruins weren't ruins anymore. They were working stills, with copper pipes gleaming and fires burning bright underneath them. Men in overalls were moving between the stills, checking temperatures and adjusting flames. The air was full of smoke and steam and the sounds of hard work, and standing right in front of me was the man I'd glimpsed before. Only now I could see him clearly. He was tall and lean, with gray hair and eyes like mountain lakes. There were bullet holes in his shirt, dark and wet like they'd just happened. But he was smiling at me like we were old friends meeting for the first time in years. "Well, I'll be damned," he said. "You really are Tobias's boy. You got the look of him around the eyes." I tried to speak but couldn't get any words out. The man reached out and took the mason jar from my trembling hands. "Easy, son. First taste always hits hard. You'll get used to it." He took a long drink from the jar and smacked his lips. "Mighty fine batch, if I do say so myself. Been working on this recipe for, about 36 years now." "You're dead," I finally managed to croak. He laughed, that same sound I'd heard echoing around the hollow. "Dead? Hell, boy, I ain't dead. I'm just not breathing anymore. There's a difference." The other men had stopped their work and were looking at me now. I counted 12 of them, all wearing the clothes of Depression-era mountain men, all with bullet wounds in their chests and backs, all smiling at me like I was exactly who they'd been waiting for. "The federal agents," I said. "Where are they?" The man who'd been talking to me, and I was starting to suspect I knew exactly who he was, pointed toward a cluster of buildings that definitely hadn't been there when I'd walked into the hollow. "They're learning the family trade," he said, "taking to it pretty well, considering they came here to shut us down." I could see the 2 ATF agents now. They were sitting on wooden crates, each holding a mason jar, looking dazed and happy. They'd been missing for almost 24 hours, but they looked like they'd aged years. Gray streaks in their hair, new lines around their eyes. "What did you do to them?" "Same thing we're going to do to you, grandson. We're going to teach you about family pride, about the old ways, about what it means to be a moon whisper." And that's when I knew for certain who I was talking to. This was my great-grandfather's older brother, Jeremiah, the one who died in the federal raid of 1932, the one the family still talked about in whispers. "You can't keep them," I said, "and you can't keep me. I'm a federal officer." Jeremiah's smile never wavered. "Boy, you're kin, and kin comes before badges every time." The hollow started spinning around me. The last thing I remembered was Jeremiah catching me as I fell, his hands cold as winter stones. I woke up lying on a bed in what looked like a log cabin that had no business existing. The walls were solid timber, and there was a fire crackling in a stone fireplace. Outside the window I could see the hollow, but it looked like it had 40 years ago, alive and bustling with activity. My head felt like someone had used it for anvil practice. When I tried to sit up, the world tilted dangerously. "Take it easy, son." Jeremiah was sitting in a rocking chair by the fire, whittling on a piece of wood. "Good mountain whiskey hits hard when you ain't used to it." "How long was I out?" "Time moves different here," he said without looking up from his whittling. "Could be an hour, could be a day. Don't matter much." I managed to sit up and look around. The cabin was furnished like something from the 1930s. Oil lamps, handmade furniture, mason jars full of clear liquid lined up on shelves. And on the mantel above the fireplace there was an old photograph I recognized. It showed my great-grandfather Tobias and his brothers, including Jeremiah, standing proud in front of their stills. They were all young men then, full of life and mountain pride. I'd seen the same picture in my grandmother's photo album. "You remember Tobias talking about this place?" Jeremiah asked. "He never talked about it. Grandma said the whole family swore never to mention what happened here." Jeremiah nodded sadly. "Of course they didn't. Federal boys came down on us like hellfire, and when the smoke cleared, 12 good men were dead. Tobias was the only one got away, and only because I sent him running when I saw the agents coming up the ridge. You saved his life. And he lived with the guilt of it for 60 years. Never made another drop of shine, never even took a drink, became a deacon in the church and raised his family to be respectable." Jeremiah set down his whittling and looked at me. "But blood tells, don't it? Here you are, wearing a badge and carrying a gun, but you're still one of us." Through the window, and I could see the 2 ATF agents working at one of the stills. They were moving with the practiced efficiency of men who'd been doing the job for years, testing the temperature of the mash and adjusting the flame. But their faces looked older, worn. "What's happening to them?" "They're learning family trade, same as you're going to learn." Jeremiah stood up and walked to the window. 36 years we've been waiting for kin to come home. 36 years of making the finest whiskey in Kentucky with no one to pass the secrets to. I'm not staying here. You think you got a choice? Jeremiah's voice was sad but firm. Boy, you drank our whiskey. You accepted our hospitality. You're family. And family don't walk away from family. I stood up, swaying a little but staying on my feet. I'm a federal officer. I have a job to do. Your job is here now, learning the old ways, keeping the tradition alive. I walked toward the door, but Jeremiah moved faster than any dead man should be able to move. Suddenly he was standing between me and the exit, and his eyes weren't friendly anymore. Sit down, nephew. It wasn't a request. There was power behind those words, the kind of authority that came from being the oldest and strongest of the dead. I felt my legs give out, and I collapsed back into the chair. That's better. Now we're going to have ourselves a real talk about family obligations. For the next several hours, though time really did seem to move strangely in that place, Jeremiah told me stories about the old days when making moonshine was a matter of pride, not just profit, about how the federal government had tried to destroy mountain culture and mountain independence, about the night in 1932 when 12 good men died defending their way of life. We wasn't hurting nobody, he said. We was making honest whiskey from honest corn, selling it to folks who wanted to buy it. But the federal boys, they said we was criminals, said we was stealing from the government by not paying taxes on every jar. The law is the law, I said, though the words felt hollow. Jeremiah laughed bitterly. The law, boy, the law said it was legal to own people once upon a time. The law said it was legal to take Indian land and kill Indian children. Just because something's law don't make it right. He had a point, but I couldn't let him see that. So you're going to keep those agents here forever? Turn them into ghosts like yourselves? We ain't ghosts, Jeremiah said firmly. We're just folks who ain't finished with our work yet. And those federal boys, they're learning to appreciate what we do here. Give it time. They'll see the wisdom of it. Through the window, I watched the agents working. They did look content in a disturbing way, but they also looked like they were aging a year for every hour they spent here. They're dying, I said. They're learning to live differently, Jeremiah corrected. Same as you're going to learn. That night, if it was night, I lay awake in the cabin, listening to the sounds of the distillery operation outside. The bubble and hiss of fermenting mash, the clink of mason jars, the low voices of the dead men as they worked. And underneath it all, that fiddle music I'd heard earlier. Someone was playing a mournful tune about lost love and mountain sorrow. It was beautiful and heartbreaking, and it made me think about my own life. 21 years as a ranger, walking the line between the old mountain ways and modern law enforcement. Never quite fitting in either world. Maybe Jeremiah was right. Maybe this was where I belonged. But then I remembered the outside world. My job, my responsibilities. People were counting on me to bring those agents home safely. I couldn't just disappear into mountain folklore and family pride. I had to find a way out of Dark Hollow, and I had to take the agents with me. The question was how to fight ghosts who were stronger than living men and had 36 years of practice at keeping prisoners. The answer came to me at dawn, when the mist was rising from Dark Hollow Creek and the dead moonshiners were finishing their night's work. I was sitting on the cabin porch drinking coffee that tasted better than any coffee had a right to taste, when I remembered something my great-grandfather had told me. It was just before he died, and he'd been talking about his brothers in the old days. He'd said something that hadn't made sense at the time. The only way to make peace with the dead is to honor what they lived for. Jeremiah came out of the cabin and sat down beside me. In the morning light, he looked less solid, more like shadows and memory than flesh and bone. "You've been thinking hard all night," he said. "I can see it in your face. I want to make a deal." He raised an eyebrow. "What kind of deal?" "Let the federal agents go. Let me go. And I'll make sure the world remembers what really happened here in 1932. Jeremiah was quiet for a long time, staring out at the hollow where his brothers were banking the fires and storing the night's production in hidden caves. "How you going to do that? You're just one ranger in a big government that don't care about mountain people." "I'll find a way. I'll get the story told right. Not the official version about criminals being brought to justice, but the real story about men defending their families and their way of life." "And what makes you think anybody would listen?" I thought about that. Because I'm a moon whisper. Because I'm family. Because it's my story to tell, too. Jeremiah stood up and walked to the edge of the porch. For a moment I could see right through him to the trees beyond. "Ain't enough," he said. "Stories get forgotten. People die. But this," he gestured at the working distillery, "this is permanent. Long as we're here, the old ways survive. The old ways are already dying. Look around you. How many young mountain people do you see learning to make whiskey? How many care about the traditions? You're keeping the past alive, but you're not building a future." That stung him. Could see it in the way his shoulders sagged. "Then what you suggesting?" "Let me bridge the gap. Let me be the connection between the old ways and the new world. I can make sure young people learn about their heritage without having to die for it." Jeremiah turned to look at me, and his eyes were sad and ancient. "You really think you can do that? Living in both worlds without losing your soul to either one?" "I have to try. It's what Tobias would have wanted. It's what you would want if you weren't so angry about dying." "I ain't angry about dying, boy. I'm angry about being forgotten." And there it was. The real truth behind 36 years of haunting Dark Hollow. They weren't trying to preserve moonshine tradition. They were trying to preserve memory. They were afraid that their sacrifice had been meaningless. "You won't be forgotten," I promised. "I'll make sure of that." Jeremiah stared at me for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly. "All right, but there's conditions. You want them federal boys back. You gotta prove you understand what we died for. You gotta drink with us. Really drink. Share the last batch we ever made together." He led me down to the main still site, where the other dead moonshiners were gathered in a circle. They'd laid out 12 mason jars on a flat rock, each one full of clear whiskey that seemed to glow in the morning light. "This here's the batch we was making when the federal boys came," Jeremiah said. "Been aging for 36 years. Finest whiskey ever made in these mountains." The 2 ATF agents were there too, looking dazed and confused. Up close, I could see they'd aged terribly during their time in the hollow. Both had gray hair and deep lines around their eyes, but they were still alive. "You drink with us," Jeremiah said. "Share our last whiskey, and we'll let all 3 of you go. But understand this, once you taste it, you'll carry part of us with you forever. You'll never be able to forget what happened here." I looked at the 12 jars of impossible whiskey. 12 jars for 12 dead men. I knew that if I drank from one of those jars, I'd be changed forever. But I also knew it was the only way to save the agents and keep my promise to bridge the old world and the new. "All right," I said. "Let's drink to family." I picked up the jar that Jeremiah indicated was his. The whiskey inside was warm and seemed to move with its own life. When I raised it to my lips, I could smell 36 years of aging, 36 years of mountain pride and family honor and defiant independence. I drank. The whiskey burned like liquid fire, but it was the cleanest burn I'd ever felt. And as it went down, I felt something changing inside me. I could see the hollow as it really was, not just the ruins and broken dreams, but the living history. I could feel the weight of family tradition and the pride of mountain craftsmen who had died for what they believed in. And I could see Jeremiah clearly now, not as a ghost or a wraith, but as my great-great-uncle, a man who had loved his family and his mountains enough to die defending them. "Now you understand," he said softly. The other dead moonshiners picked up their jars and drank with us. One by one, they began to fade, their work finally finished. But before they disappeared completely, each one nodded to me, passing on their memories and their pride. Jeremiah was the last to go. He put his hand on my shoulder, and for a moment it felt warm and solid and alive. "Take care of our story, nephew. Make sure folks know we wasn't criminals. We was just mountain people trying to live free." "I will," I promised. And then he was gone, and I was standing alone in the ruins with two very confused federal agents who looked like they'd aged 10 years in 2 days. The official report listed the incident as severe hypothermia and alcohol poisoning. The ATF agents had apparently found a cache of very old, very potent moonshine and had sampled it while waiting out the storm. They'd been found unconscious near the ruins of an illegal distillery operation from the 1930s. No one questioned why they looked so much older or why their hair had gone gray overnight. Shock does strange things to people, and mountain whiskey can be unpredictable. I never told anyone the real story, at least not officially. But I kept my promise to Jeremiah and his brothers. Over the next 20 years, I became something of an expert on Appalachian history and mountain culture. I wrote articles for historical journals about the federal raids of the 1930s and the mountain families who were caught between tradition and federal law. I gave talks at universities about the complex relationship between mountain communities and government authority. I made sure people remembered that the men who died in Dark Hollow weren't criminals. They were fathers and brothers and sons who were trying to preserve a way of life that went back generations. The hollow itself became a historical preservation site. Not officially. The federal government wasn't quite ready to acknowledge that they'd been wrong in 1932, but informally, through the work of local historical societies and mountain heritage groups. People visit Dark Hollow now respectfully. They come to learn about moonshine history and mountain culture. Sometimes they leave small offerings, mason jars, corn, sometimes even bottles of store-bought whiskey. The gifts always disappear overnight, though I've never seen anyone take them. The old stills are still there, rusted and broken. But on certain mornings when the mist is rising from the creek and the light hits the metal just right, you can almost see smoke rising from them. And if you listen carefully, you might hear the faint sound of fiddle music echoing off the hollow walls. The two ATF agents recovered fully, though they never quite looked as young as they had before their experience in Dark Hollow. Both of them transferred to different divisions within a year. Neither one ever spoke publicly about what happened during those missing 24 hours. But Agent Morrison, the older of the two, came to see me about 6 months later. He brought a mason jar filled with store-bought whiskey and asked me to leave it in Dark Hollow. "I keep having dreams," he said, "about the old days, about men who took pride in their work. I figure I owe them something." I took the jar and promised to deliver it. That night, I hiked down to the hollow and left it on the flat rock where Jeremiah had placed his 12 jars of 36-year-old whiskey. The next morning, the jar was gone. As for me, I carry the taste of that impossible whiskey with me every day. It reminds me that there are two sides to every story, and that sometimes the law and justice aren't the same thing. It reminds me that family and tradition and mountain pride are worth preserving, even when the world changes around them. And sometimes, on quiet nights when I'm walking patrol in the deep woods, I can still hear Jeremiah's voice on the wind. "Take care of our story, nephew." I am. I always will. Because some promises are too important to break, even when they're made to the dead. My name is Jeremiah Blackwood, and I've been a park ranger for 13 years. I know every trail, every cave, every hidden stream in the George Washington National Forest. People trust me to find their lost kids, their missing hikers, their grandfathers who wandered off from camping trips. In 13 years, I never lost anybody. Until March of 1973. I was born in these mountains. My daddy died in a mine cave-in when I was 12, along with my mama from the grief that followed. The forest raised me after that. I learned to read animal tracks before I could read books properly. I could smell weather changes 3 days out and hear trouble in the woods from a mile away. That's why what happened in Devil's Backbone Ridge shook me so bad. Because I should have known. The signs were all there. It started on a Tuesday morning when Mrs. Patterson called the ranger station, her voice high and shaky. "The boys never came back," she said. 8 boys from Scout Troop 47. They were supposed to be back by dawn. The scouts had permission to camp overnight in Whispering Hollow, a pretty spot about 6 miles up the Devil's Backbone Trail. It was March, still cold at night but warming during the day. Good weather for camping, if you knew what you were doing. And these weren't little kids, ages 12 to 16, led by Tom Patterson, who'd been camping since he could walk. I grabbed my gear and headed up the trail. The mayor's son was in that group, along with the banker's boy and the sheriff's nephew. Half the town would be breathing down my neck before noon. But as I hiked up toward Whispering Hollow, something felt wrong. The forest was too quiet. No birds singing, no squirrels chattering, no buzz of insects. Just the sound of my boots on the trail and my own breathing. I've walked these woods thousands of times. They're usually full of life, deer crashing through the brush, woodpeckers hammering on dead trees, the rustle of small things in the leaves. But that morning, it was like walking through a graveyard. The air smelled wrong, too. Sweet and sick, like flowers left too long in water. And cold spots kept hitting me. Pockets of freezing air that made no sense when the sun was shining and it was near 50 degrees. When I reached the camping spot, everything looked normal at first. 8 sleeping bags laid out in a neat circle around a cold fire pit. Backpacks stacked against trees. Cans of beans and hot dogs arranged on a flat rock like the boys were coming right back. But the sleeping bags were still warm. After 12 hours, they should have been cold as stone. I called out, my voice echoing off the rocky walls of the hollow. "Tom! Boys! This is Ranger Blackwood." Nothing. Not even an echo came back right. It sounded flat, dead. That's when I saw the handprints. They were pressed into the solid rock face of the hollow wall. Small hands, like children's hands, but pressed so deep into the stone that they looked like they'd been there for years. They led up the wall toward a cave opening I'd never noticed before, though I'd been to Whispering Hollow dozens of times. I counted them. 8 sets of handprints, 8 missing boys. The cave mouth was narrow, just wide enough for a person to squeeze through. Cold air flowed out of it, carrying that sweet, sick smell. And from somewhere deep inside, I heard something that made my blood freeze. Children laughing, soft and echoey, like it was coming from very far away. But definitely children's laughter. The kind of sound that should have made me feel better, knowing the boys were probably okay. Instead, it made me want to run. I've never been a man who scares easy. You can't be, in my job. But standing there listening to that laughter drift up from the dark, every instinct I had was screaming at me to get out of those woods. The laughter stopped suddenly, like someone had turned off a radio. The silence that followed was even worse. I radioed back to the station. "This is Blackwood. I'm at the campsite. The boys aren't here, but I found a trail, requesting backup and search dogs." Static crackled back at me. "Say again, Blackwood? You're breaking up." I tried twice more, but the radio just hissed and popped. The mountains played hell with radio signals sometimes, but I'd never had trouble from Whispering Hollow before. I was on my own. I should have waited for backup. That's what the manual says. Never enter a cave system alone. Always have support. Always tell someone your exact location. But those were real boys down there. Kids I'd watched grow up. The mayor's son, Johnny, had asked me just last month about becoming a ranger when he graduated high school. I squeezed through the cave opening, my flashlight beam dancing ahead of me. The tunnel was tight at first, barely wide enough for my shoulders, but it opened up after 20 feet into a larger passage. The walls were limestone, carved smooth by water over thousands of years. My light picked out strange shapes in the rock, formations that almost looked like faces if you caught them wrong. The air was getting colder the deeper I went. After 10 minutes of walking, I found the first piece of evidence that the boys had been this way. A red bandana tied to a rock spike. Tom Patterson's. He was smart, leaving a trail for rescuers to follow. But as I picked up the bandana, I heard something that made me freeze. Footsteps behind me. Small, light footsteps like a child would make. I spun around, flashlight beams sweeping the tunnel behind me. Nothing there. Just empty rock and shadows. "Hello?" I called. "Is someone there?" My voice bounced off the walls and came back strange, like it was being repeated by someone else. Someone with a higher voice, a child's voice. "Hello? Is someone there?" came the echo. But it wasn't quite right. It sounded like a little boy trying to copy me. I kept moving deeper, following the tunnel as it curved and branched. Every 50 feet or so, I'd find another marker, a compass, a pocket knife, a water bottle. Tom was doing good, leaving a clear trail. But the footsteps kept following me, sometimes behind, sometimes ahead, sometimes off to the side in tunnels that shouldn't exist. Light, quick steps like children playing hide and seek. The tunnel opened into a huge underground room. My flashlight beam couldn't reach the ceiling or the far walls. It was like stepping into a cathedral made of stone, and it was full of things. Camping gear scattered everywhere. Sleeping bags, backpacks, lanterns, cooking pots. But not just new stuff. Some of it looked old, really old. I saw a leather satchel that looked like it came from the 1800s, and a rusty mining helmet that made my chest tight. That helmet looked exactly like the one my daddy wore down in the mines. I picked it up with shaking hands. J. Blackwood was scratched into the metal. My grandfather's name was Jonathan. He'd disappeared in these mountains back in 1892, when my daddy was just a boy. "You found it." I spun around so fast I nearly fell. A young voice, maybe 12 years old. But when I swept my flashlight across the cavern, there was nobody there. "Who's there?" My voice cracked like I was 13 again. "We've been waiting for you, Jeremiah." The voice seemed to come from everywhere at once. "Waiting such a long time." That's when I saw them. They stood at the edge of my flashlight beam, just barely visible. Children in old-fashioned clothes, knickers and suspenders for the boys, long dresses for the girls. Their skin was pale as milk, and when the light hit their eyes, they reflected it back like an animal's. There were dozens of them. "Where are the scouts?" I managed to ask. "Where are the boys who came down here?" "They're playing with us," said a girl who couldn't have been more than 8. "We've been so lonely. It's been 20 years since anyone came to play." She stepped closer, and I saw that her dress was rotted and dirty, like she'd been wearing it for decades. Her face was pretty in an old-fashioned way, but her eyes were wrong. Too big, too dark, like looking into deep holes. "We died here," said a boy about Johnny's age. "The sickness took us all. Mama and Papa couldn't come because of the quarantine. We've been waiting and waiting for them to come get us." More children stepped into the light. All of them pale, all of them in old clothes, all of them with those terrible dark eyes. "But other children come sometimes," the girl continued, "and they're so warm and full of breath. We love to play with them." "What did you do with the scouts?" I demanded, trying to keep my voice steady. "Nothing bad," said the boy. "We're just borrowing their breath for a while, so we can feel alive again. But they get so tired, so fast." Behind the group of dead children, I saw something that made my heart stop. 8 modern sleeping bags lined up against the cavern wall, and in them, barely visible, 8 still forms. The missing scouts. I started toward them, but the dead children moved to block my path. They didn't walk. They just sort of flowed across the stone floor like smoke. "You can't take them yet," the little girl said. "We're not done playing, but you can play too. We remember you, Jeremiah. Your grandfather played with us a long time ago, before he got too tired." The mining helmet slipped from my numb fingers and clanged on the stone floor. "He's still here," she whispered. "Want to see him?" From somewhere deeper in the cave system came a sound that nearly broke my mind. An adult voice, familiar as my own, calling my name. "Jeremiah! Boy, is that you? I've been looking everywhere for you." It was my grandfather's voice. The grandfather I'd never met, who'd disappeared before I was born. But I knew that voice like I knew my own heartbeat, because it was the same voice my daddy had. The same voice I had. "Don't listen," I whispered to myself. "He's dead. Been dead for 80 years. But the voice kept calling, getting closer. "Jeremiah, come here, boy. Grandpa's got something to show you." The dead children giggled, a sound like breaking glass. "He wants to meet you," the little girl said. "He's been waiting so long. We all have." I forced myself to look at the sleeping scouts. They were alive, but barely. Their faces were gray and sunken, like they were aging years by the minute. Their breathing was so shallow I could hardly see their chests moving. "What are you doing to them?" I asked. "Playing the breathing game," said a boy with dark hair. "We breathe in when they breathe out. It makes us feel real again. But they don't like the game very much." I could see why. The boys in the sleeping bags looked like they'd been sick for weeks. Their hair was falling out, their skin was paper thin, and their lips were blue. "How long can they survive this?" "Not long," the girl said sadly. "The last ones only lasted 2 days. But it's okay. When they get too tired to play anymore, they stay with us forever. Then, we're never lonely." She pointed to the back of the cavern, where I could see more sleeping bags. Dozens of them, arranged in neat rows. Some looked recent, others so old the fabric was rotting off the frames. My grandfather's voice kept calling from the depths. "Jeremiah, don't be scared, boy. Come see what Grandpa found." I had to make a choice. Save the scouts and probably die trying, or get out of there and come back with help that might arrive too late. Then I remembered something my daddy used to tell me about his daddy. Jonathan Blackwood had been the bravest man in the county, he said. Never backed down from a fight. Never left anyone behind. I wasn't about to break that tradition. "I want to make a deal," I said to the dead children. They tilted their hossu, eads like curious birds. "What kind of deal?" "Let the scouts go, and I'll stay and play with you instead. I'm stronger than them. I'll last longer." The children looked at each other with those terrible dark eyes. I could see them having some kind of silent conversation. "That's a good deal," the little girl finally said. "But we want all of you. The boys can stay and play too." "No, just me." "But why? We're so lonely. 8 friends are better than 1. I needed to buy time. Think of something. The scouts were dying right in front of me, their breath getting weaker and weaker. "Because," I said, "I know games they don't know. Games my grandfather taught me before he came to play with you." The children's eyes lit up with interest. "What games?" "Hide and seek in the deep caves. I know places to hide where no one can find me. Places your grandfather never found." It was a lie, but I was desperate. "If you can't find me, you have to let the scouts go. But if you do find me, I'll stay forever and teach you all the games I know." The children whispered among themselves in voices too low for me to hear. "How long do we get to look for you?" asked the dark-haired boy. "Until sunrise. If I'm still hidden when the sun comes up, the scouts go free." I checked my watch. 3:33 a.m., about 3 hours until dawn. "And if we find you before then?" "Then I stay, and you can keep the scouts too." More whispering, more of those dark, empty eyes staring at me. "Okay," the little girl said finally. "But no cheating, no going back to the world above. The game stays in our caves." "Deal." "Deal," they said in unison, their voices echoing strangely off the stone walls. "We'll give you to the count of 100, the boy said. "Then we start looking. And Jeremiah, we're very good at hide and seek. We've had lots of practice." I was already moving toward the tunnel entrance when I heard them start counting. 1, 2, 3. Their voices followed me into the dark, sweet and terrible as poisoned candy. 4, 5, 6. I ran deeper into the cave, system, my flashlight beam bouncing wildly ahead of me. I had to find somewhere they couldn't follow, somewhere they couldn't phase through the rock to reach me. 21, 22, 23. The caves branched off in every direction. I took the narrowest tunnel I could find, one barely wide enough for my shoulders. Maybe the dead children couldn't squeeze through spaces this tight. 47, 48, 49. I squeezed through a crack in the rock and found myself in another large cavern. This one was different, older somehow. The walls were covered in paintings that looked like they'd been made by Native Americans hundreds of years ago. Pictures of children with black eyes. Pictures of people breathing out their souls. Pictures of warnings. 97, 98, 99, 100. The counting stopped. The caves fell silent. Then I heard the little girl's voice, impossibly close even though she couldn't have crossed the cavern that fast. "Ready or not, here we come." The first thing I learned was that the dead children didn't have to follow the same rules as the living. They could move through solid rock like it was air, appear and disappear without warning, and see perfectly in the absolute darkness of the deep caves. The second thing I learned was that they were playing with me. I spent 2 hours crawling through tunnels barely wide enough for a man, squeezing through cracks that scraped skin off my shoulders, hiding in spaces so small I could barely breathe. And every time I thought I'd found a safe spot, I'd hear their laughter echoing from the walls around me. They were everywhere and nowhere. I'd catch glimpses of pale faces in my flashlight beam, hear footsteps running past in tunnels I couldn't see. Sometimes they'd call to me in voices I recognized, my daddy, my mama, friends who'd died years ago. "Jeremiah, what are you running from?" in my mother's sweet voice. "Son, come home now," in my father's stern tone. "Jerry, we're worried about you," in the voice of my high school girlfriend, who'd died in a car wreck. But I kept moving, kept looking for something that might save those boys. The cave paintings had given me an idea, if I could just find what I was looking for. With an hour left until sunrise, I found it. A small chamber decorated with Cherokee symbols, older than anything else in the cave system. In the center was a circle of stones with a fire pit that looked like it had been used recently. This was a sacred place, somewhere the Cherokee had come to speak with the spirits of the dead. And lying next to the fire pit was a leather journal, wrapped in oiled cloth to protect it from the damp. I opened it with shaking hands. The first entry was dated 1892, written in my grandfather's careful handwriting. The Cherokee warned me not to come here during the time of the thin veil, when winter turns to spring. But the children called so sweetly, and I thought I was strong enough to resist. I was wrong. I flipped through pages of his writing, chronicling his time trapped in the caves with the dead children. His breath slowly being stolen night after night, his strength fading, his hope dying. But near the end, there was something else. A conversation with an old Cherokee medicine man who'd come looking for him. "The children are not evil," he told me. "They're lost, separated from their ancestors by the sickness that killed them. They steal breath because they think it will help them find their way to the spirit world. But breath from the living only traps them deeper in this in-between place." "How do I help them?" I asked. "You must help them remember what they've forgotten, that their parents are waiting for them, not in this world, but in the next. Show them the path to the ancestor trail." "And how do I do that?" "With the breath song, the one my grandmother taught me when I was small." The rest of the journal contained the words T, a Cherokee chant, written out phonetically so a white man could pronounce them, a song to help lost spirits find their way home. My grandfather had never gotten the chance to use it. The children had found him first. There you are. I spun around. The little girl stood at the entrance to the sacred chamber, her dark eyes reflecting my flashlight beam. We've been looking everywhere for you, she said. The game is almost over. The sun will rise soon. I know. I closed the journal and stood up. But I found what I was looking for. More children flowed into the chamber behind her, all of them, dozens of pale faces with those terrible empty eyes. They filled the small space, but somehow there was still room for all of them, like they weren't quite solid. You lose, the dark-haired boy said. The scouts belong to us now, and so do you. Maybe, I said, but let me ask you something first. Do you remember your parents? The children looked confused. Of course we do. They're coming to get us. They promised. When did they promise that? When we got sick. They said they'd come as soon as the quarantine was over. How long ago was that? The little girl frowned. A little while. Maybe a long while. Time is hard to remember here. It was over 100 years ago, I told them gently. Your parents have been waiting for you all this time, but not here. They're waiting for you in the spirit world, on the ancestor trail. No, said the boy. They said they'd come here, to this place. They promised. They tried, I said. But the sickness was too strong. They died too, waiting for the quarantine to end. They've been calling to you from the other side, but you couldn't hear them because you were listening to the breath of the living instead of the voices of the dead. The children looked at each other with uncertainty for the first time. That's not true, Time, the little girl whispered. They're coming. They have to be coming. I opened the journal to the pages with the breath song. Your Cherokee neighbors knew what happened to you. They tried to help you find your way home. Let me show you the path they found. I began to chant the words my grandfather had written down, pronunciation rough but heartfelt. It was a song about letting go, about finding peace, about joining the ancestors who were waiting with open arms. The children listened with wide eyes. As I sang, their faces began to change. The terrible darkness in their eyes faded, replaced by something that looked almost like hope. I hear them, the little girl whispered. I hear Mama calling. Me too, said the boy. Papa says he's been looking for us. Light began to fill the chamber, not from my flashlight, but from somewhere else. Somewhere beyond the world of rock and stone and darkness. One by one, the children began to fade. Not disappearing, but becoming transparent, like they were made of moonlight instead of shadow. Thank you, the little girl said as she became harder and harder to see. We were so lost, so tired of being lost. Will the scout boys be okay? I asked. They'll be fine. Their breath is their own again. The last thing I saw was her smile, sad but peaceful, before she faded completely away. The chamber fell silent except for the sound of my own breathing. From somewhere far above, I heard the faint sound of voices calling my name. Real voices this time, belonging to the living. The rescue team had finally arrived. It took 4 hours to get the scout boys out of the caves. They were unconscious but alive, breathing normally for the first time in 2 days. The doctors at the county hospital said they'd suffered from severe hypothermia and some kind of respiratory distress, but they'd recover fully. None of them remembered anything about the Hollow children. As far as they knew, they'd gotten lost in the cave system and passed out from the cold and bad air. I never told anyone the real story. Who would believe it? Instead, I filed a report about carbon monoxide buildup in the deeper caves, a geological hazard that could cause hallucinations and unconsciousness. The county sealed the cave entrance with concrete and posted warning signs, but I kept my grandfather's journal. 3 weeks later, I put in for a transfer to a different section of the forest, somewhere with fewer caves and more open sky. I married Emma Whitehorse, the Cherokee ranger who'd taught me about respecting the old ways and listening to the warnings of the ancestors. I still work as a ranger, but I've never lost another hiker. Maybe I'm more careful now, or maybe I just know better which warnings to take seriously. Sometimes, On quiet nights when the mist rises from the hollows and the temperature drops for no good reason, I hear children's laughter carried on the wind, but it sounds different now, happy instead of hungry, free instead of trapped. The hollow children found their way home, but there are other spirits in these mountains, other lost souls who died before their time. And sometimes, when people don't listen to the old stories or respect the sacred places, those spirits get restless too. If you ever find yourself camping in the Appalachian Mountains, listen to the local folks when they tell you which hollows to avoid. Pay attention when the forest gets too quiet or the air smells too sweet. And if you hear children's laughter echoing from places where no children should be, don't go looking for them. Some games are better left unplayed. The Cherokee knew that, even if the rest of us have forgotten. They say these mountains are thin places, where the world of the living touches the world of the dead. Most of the time, that boundary holds. But during certain times of year, when winter turns to spring and the mist rises from the hollows, that boundary gets weak. That's when the lost ones call out, hoping someone will help them find their way home. I was lucky. I found the right song to sing. Next time, someone might not be so fortunate. So remember what I've told you. Respect the sacred places. Listen to the warnings of the ancestors. And if you ever hear your name being called by voices that shouldn't exist, don't answer. Some invitations are better left declined. My name is Samuel Ironheart, and I've been a park ranger for 19 years. I know every trail, every cave, and every dangerous spot in the Monongahela National Forest. But I never believed the old stories about mine walkers until I had to go into Bloody Creek. It started on a cold October morning in 1967. The fog hung thick over the mountains like a dirty blanket, and I could smell rain coming. I was drinking coffee in my ranger station when the phone rang. "Sam, we got a problem," said Sheriff Morrison from town. His voice sounded tight. 5 college kids went missing up at Bloody Creek. They were supposed to check back yesterday. My stomach dropped. Bloody Creek was the worst place in my territory. Full of old mine shafts from the 1920s. The ground was so full of holes it looked like Swiss cheese. I'd pulled dozens of stupid kids out of those mines over the years. "What were they doing up there?" I asked. "Some kind of school project about pollution. They had fancy equipment with them. Thing is, Sam, one of them is Senator Patterson's daughter." I closed my eyes. That meant federal people would come sniffing around if we didn't find them fast. "I'll head up there now. Be careful. Weather's getting worse." I grabbed my gear and drove up the winding mountain road. The trees looked sick up there, all yellow and dying from the acid that leaked out of the old mines. Bloody Creek itself ran orange like rust water. Nothing lived in it anymore. The students had left their van at the end of the road. Inside, I found notebooks full of measurements and photos of the dead creek. Smart kids trying to show how the old mining company had poisoned the land. But smart didn't keep you alive when the ground could cave in under your feet. I followed their tracks into the woods. The fog was so thick I could barely see 10 feet ahead. Every few minutes, I'd hear sounds that momped. Me stop, little tapping noises like someone hitting metal on rock. But when I listened close, there was nothing. Their trail led straight to the main mine entrance. It had been sealed with concrete years ago, but I could see fresh scratches around the edges. The scratches looked old-fashioned, like someone had made them with pickaxes instead of modern tools. "Hello," I shouted. "This is Ranger Ironheart. Can anyone hear me?" My voice echoed back from deep underground. But underneath my echo, I swear I heard something else. Voices singing an old song my grandfather used to hum. A mining song. I shook my head. Had to be the wind in the tunnels. I found a way into the mine through a crack in the concrete seal. It was barely wide enough for a person. Inside, the air smelled like rotten eggs and metal. My flashlight beam cut through darkness that seemed to swallow the light. The mine was a maze of tunnels going every direction. Some had old wooden supports that creaked in the wind. Others had collapsed completely. I'd been in these mines before, but never this deep. After an hour of searching, I found something that made my blood freeze. The students' equipment was arranged in a neat line against the tunnel wall, but it wasn't arranged randomly. Someone had set it up to look like old mining tools. The laptops looked like lunch pails. The cameras looked like carbide lamps. And the equipment was covered in coal dust, even though this mine had been closed for 40 years. I heard that tapping sound again, louder this time. Tap, 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 like someone digging with a pickaxe. It echoed from deeper in the mine. "Students, answer me if you can hear this." The tapping stopped. Then I heard a voice, faint and far away. "Down here. We're working down here." Working? What were they working on? I followed the voice deeper into the mine. The tunnels got narrower and the air got worse. My flashlight started flickering, which was weird because I'd put in fresh batteries that morning. That's when I saw the first light. It wasn't electric light. It was yellow and dancing, like flame. As I got closer, I could see it was coming from around a bend in the tunnel. When I turned the corner, I saw something impossible. 5 young people were digging at the tunnel wall with their bare hands. Their fingers were bloody and their clothes were torn. They were the missing students, but they looked wrong somehow. They moved too stiff, like puppets, and standing behind them, almost see-through, was a man in old mining clothes. He held a pickaxe and wore one of those old helmet lamps. When he turned to look at me, his eyes were just dark holes. "You're late for your shift," he said in a voice like gravel. "The work must continue." I blinked hard, and the see-through man was gone. But the students kept digging, their hands scraping against rock like they couldn't feel pain. "Hey!" I shouted. "Stop that! You're hurt!" One of them turned around. It was a girl, maybe 20 years old. Her face was streaked with coal dust and her eyes looked empty. "Can't stop," she said in a flat voice. "Have to dig. Have to reach the other side before the gas comes." Gas? I checked my meter. The readings were jumping all over the place. Sometimes normal, sometimes deadly. That was impossible. Gas doesn't work that way. "Listen to me," I said, trying to sound calm. "I'm a ranger. I'm here to help you. We need to get out of here now." But they just kept digging. Their fingernails were gone and their hands were raw meat, but they dug like their lives depended on it. I grabbed the closest student, a boy with a broken pair of glasses hanging from his face. He felt cold as ice. When I pulled him away from the wall, he fought me with surprising strength. "Let me go," he screamed. "I have to finish my shift. The boss will dock our pay if we don't make quota." Boss? These kids were college students, not minors. But the way he talked, it sounded exactly like my grandfather. There used to talk about the old days in the mines. I heard footsteps behind me and spun around. 3 more figures stood in the tunnel, old men in mining clothes, their faces black with coal dust. They were see-through like smoke, but I could hear their breathing. "New man," one of them said. "Good. We need all hands. Been working short-handed since the accident." "What accident?" I asked, even though part of me already knew. "Cave-in of 24, another ghost said. 47 good men lost. But the work can't stop. Coal don't mine itself. My grandfather had told me about the cave-in when I was little. It happened right here in Bloody Creek Mine. The company said it was an accident, but my grandfather always claimed someone had set off dynamite on purpose. The miners had been trying to form a union. "Listen," I said to the ghosts, "that was over 40 years ago. You're dead. These kids don't belong here." The lead ghost laughed, but it sounded like wind through a graveyard. "Dead? Boy, we've been working this mine every day since it happened. Just because they sealed the entrance don't mean the coal stopped waiting." One of the students, the girl I'd seen first, suddenly screamed and fell to her knees. Blood ran down her arms where she'd been digging, but she kept scraping at the rock. "Please," she whispered. "Please let me stop. My hands hurt so bad." But her body kept moving, like something else was controlling it. The ghost miners stepped closer. I could see through them, but they cast shadows in my flashlight beam. The leader pointed at me with a pickaxe that gleamed like it was still sharp. "You got miner's blood," he said. "I can smell it on you. Your granddaddy worked these tunnels." He was right. Grandpa had been a miner here before the cave-in. He'd been running late that day, stopped to help a hurt horse on his way to work. That delay saved his life. He'd do it, I said. But he got out. He became a farmer. Should have stayed, the ghost said. Still owes us a shift. All the Ironhearts do. Family debt. The temperature in the tunnel dropped. 20 degrees in 2 seconds. My breath came out in white puffs. The students' digging got faster and more desperate. I heard a new sound, a deep rumbling from somewhere above us. The mine supports creaked and dust fell from the ceiling. What are they digging toward? I asked. The ghost smiled with teeth like broken coal. The active mine on the other side of the mountain. If we can break through, we can drain their operation. Flood it with gas. Make them pay for what they did to us. I knew that mine. It employed half the men in the county. If these ghosts succeeded in breaking through, the gas explosion would kill hundreds of people. You can't do that, I said. Innocent people work there. Innocent. The ghost's voice got louder and angrier. We were innocent too, killed for wanting fair wages and safe working conditions. Let them taste what we tasted. The rumbling got louder. Rocks started falling from the ceiling. The whole mountain was becoming unstable. I had to make a choice. Try to save the students and probably die, or run for the surface and let whatever was going to happen happen. But as I looked at the girl on her knees, still digging with bloody stumps where her fingers used to be, I knew I couldn't leave them. I'll make you a deal, I told the ghost. The lead ghost held up his hand and the students stopped digging. They swayed on their feet like they might fall over, but their empty eyes stayed fixed on the rock wall. What kind of deal? The ghost asked. You want justice for what happened in 1924, right? Recognition that you were murdered, not killed in an accident? The ghost nodded slowly. Company men blew the supports, made it look like gas explosion. We knew too much about their crooked books. Then let me help you get real justice. Not revenge that hurts innocent people, but real justice. I'll make sure the world knows what really happened. Ned! The other ghosts murmured to each other in voices like wind through dead leaves. Some seemed interested, but others shook their heads. Pretty words, the lead ghost said. But we tried the legal way when we were alive. Got us killed for our trouble. Times have changed. People listen to different voices now. Environmental groups, newspapers, government investigators. I know people who can help. I was lying through my teeth. I had no idea if anyone would listen to a story about a 40-year-old mining cover-up, but I had to try something. The ghost stepped closer until I could see right through his chest to the tunnel wall behind him. When he spoke, his breath smelled like methane and grave dirt. And what about them? He pointed at the students. They came here asking questions about poison water and dead fish, just like we asked questions about unsafe working conditions. They're not your enemies. They're trying to help. By exposing the mine's crimes, the ghost's eyes flared brighter. Same as we tried to do. Look how that worked out. One of the male students suddenly straightened up. When he spoke, his voice sounded different. Older, rougher. I remember you, he said, looking at me. You're Jack Ironheart's grandson. Jack was supposed to work the day we died. Lucky bastard. My grandfather's name was Jack. But how could this ghost know that? Jack was a good man, the ghost continued. Shared his lunch when times were hard. Helped men who got hurt. We don't want to hurt his blood. Then don't, I said. Let the students go. Work with me to get justice the right way. The temperature dropped even more. Ice began forming on the tunnel walls. The students' lips turned blue. Justice? Another ghost laughed bitterly. Boy, we've been waiting 43 years for justice. What makes you think it's coming now? Because now there's proof, I said, thinking fast. The students were documenting environmental damage. If that gets connected to the 1924 cover-up, people will have to listen. I pulled out one of the students' notebooks and showed it to the ghosts. Look, water tests, soil samples, photographs. This is evidence of ongoing crime. Your crime. The same company that killed you is still poisoning the land. The ghosts leaned in to look at the notebook. For a moment, they seemed almost solid, like real men interested in real evidence. Sullivan Mining Company, one of them read. Those bastards are still operating? Under a different name, but yes. Same family owns it. Same corrupt practices. This was actually true. The Sullivan family had run mining operations in West Virginia for 3 generations. They'd been sued dozens of times for environmental violations. The lead ghost was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "What exactly are you proposing? First, you let the students go. Second, you help me document what really happened in 1924. Third, you give me time to build a case that will expose the company and honor your memory. And if your plan fails?" I swallowed hard. "Then I'll come back down here and work the mine myself. One iron heart, paying the family debt." The ghost smiled, but it wasn't a happy expression. "Brave words. But you don't understand what you're offering. Once you join us, you work forever. No rest, no peace. Just digging in the dark until the mountain falls down." Behind him, I could see dozens more ghost miners filling the tunnel. Men who'd been dead for 43 years, still carrying their tools, still wearing their work clothes. All of them staring at me with hollow eyes. "I understand," I lied. "Do we have a deal?" The lead ghost looked at his companions. They whispered to each other in voices too low for me to understand. Finally, he turned back to me. "1 month," he said. "You have 1 month to keep your promise. If you fail—" He didn't finish the sentence, but I felt a cold hand touch the back of my neck, a promise that they could find me anywhere. "Deal," I said. The ghost nodded and made a gesture with his pickaxe. The students suddenly gasped and collapsed. Their eyes cleared, and they looked around in confusion and terror. "What happened?" the girl whispered. "Where are we? My hands—" "We need to get out of here now," I said. "Can you walk?" They could barely stand, but fear gave them strength. I helped them stumble back through the maze of tunnels toward the entrance. Behind us, I could hear the ghost miners singing, a sad, slow song about working in darkness and never seeing the sun. When we finally reached the surface, the students collapsed in the grass. They were hurt and confused, but alive. I radioed for medical help and told the rescue team to stay away from the mine entrance. As the ambulance drove away with the students, I stood alone at the sealed mine entrance. The concrete looked solid, but I could hear sounds from deep underground. Pickaxes hitting rock, voices calling out measurements, the creak of mine carts on invisible rails. I had 1 month to keep a promise to the dead, and I had no idea how to do it. 3 weeks later, I was no closer to keeping my promise. I'd contacted environmental groups, historians, and newspaper reporters. A few were interested in the environmental damage story, but nobody wanted to investigate a 43-year-old mining accident based on the word of a park ranger. The students were recovering in the hospital. They remembered very little about their time in the mine, just fragments about digging and voices in the dark. The doctors said they'd suffered from severe hypothermia and methane poisoning, which explained the hallucinations. But I knew better, and I was running out of time. That's when I met Eleanor Kowalski at the town diner. She was maybe 70 years old with white hair and sharp eyes. She'd been sitting alone, drinking coffee and reading a newspaper article about the missing students. "You're the ranger who found those kids," she said when I sat down at the counter. "Yes, ma'am. My husband was in that mine when it happened, 1924. He was one of the lucky ones, got out before the cave-in." I turned to look at her. "What did he tell you about that day?" Her eyes got distant. More than he should have. Tony had nightmares about it for 50 years. Said he could hear his friends calling from underground, begging for help that never came. "Did he ever say what really caused the cave-in?" Eleanor studied my face for a long moment. "You know something, don't you? About what's really down there." I couldn't tell her about the ghosts. She'd think I was crazy. But maybe I could learn something useful. "I think there's more to the story than what's in the official records," I said carefully. She reached into her purse and pulled out an old photograph. It showed a group of miners standing outside the Bloody Creek mine entrance. They looked young and strong and alive. Tony kept this his whole life, she said. Said he owed it to the dead to remember their faces. I studied the photograph. In the front row, I recognized the lead ghost, the man who'd made the deal with me. His name was written on the back, Frank Morrison, shift foreman. Frank Morrison, I said. Was he? He was organizing the union drive. Tony said Frank had evidence that the company was stealing from the workers, false weights, fake safety inspections, payroll fraud. The company owners were scared he'd expose them. What kind of evidence? Eleanor reached into her purse again and pulled out a small metal box. Tony saved this. Said Frank gave it to him the day before he died, told him to hide it somewhere safe. Inside the box were documents, payroll records, safety inspection reports, correspondence between company officials. All of it proved that Sullivan Mining had been systematically cheating and endangering their workers. This is it, I said. This is the proof we need. We? I looked up at her. Mrs. Kowalski, I need your help. These humans could finally bring justice for what happened. But I need someone people will believe, someone with credibility. I'm just an old woman. You're a widow whose husband survived the cave-in. You have documents that prove the company's guilt, and you have nothing to lose by telling the truth. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, What do you need me to do? 2 days later, Eleanor and I held a press conference at the county courthouse. She told the reporters about her husband's nightmares and showed them the documents from Frank Morrison. I talked about the environmental damage and the connection between past and present crimes. The story made the front page of 3 newspapers. Within a week, the State Environmental Agency announced they were opening an investigation into Sullivan Mining's current operations. The Historical Society said they wanted to put up a memorial for the 1924 victims, but I knew it wasn't enough. The ghosts wanted more than newspaper articles and historical markers. They wanted the truth to be official, legal, binding. So on the last night of my month deadline, I went back to the mine. The concrete seal had cracked open like an egg. I could see light coming from deep underground, the yellow glow of carbide lamps. As I climbed down through the crack, I heard voices echoing from the tunnels. Frank Morrison was waiting for me, along with all 46 other ghost miners. They looked more solid now, more real. You kept your word, Frank said. The story's getting out. It's not enough, is it? I said. It's a start. But we need more. We need the company to admit what they did. We need our names cleared of the blame they put on us. How can I make that happen? Frank smiled sadly. You can't. Some things can only be settled between the dead and the living. But you gave us hope, Samuel Ironheart. You proved that justice isn't complete. Eli dead. The other ghosts nodded. One by one, they began to fade, becoming transparent again. Are you leaving? I asked. We're resting, Frank said. For the first time in 43 years, we can rest. The truth is out there now. Others will carry it forward. As the last ghost faded away, I heard something I'd never heard before in the mine. Silence. No pickaxes, no voices, no creaking mine carts. Just blessed, peaceful silence. I climbed back to the surface as the sun was coming up. The mine entrance sealed itself behind me with a sound like a deep sigh. That was 6 months ago. The investigation into Sullivan Mining led to criminal charges for environmental violations and safety fraud. The company paid millions in fines and had to fund a cleanup of Bloody Creek. The memorial for the 1924 miners was dedicated last month. All 47 names are carved in black granite, along with the words, "They died seeking justice and dignity for all workers." Eleanor Kowalski gave the dedication speech. She talked about her husband's nightmares and how the truth had finally set him free, even in death. The students have recovered, though they still have nightmares about digging in the dark. The girl, Sarah Patterson, is writing her senior thesis about environmental justice and corporate cover-ups. She doesn't remember much about her time in the mine, but she says she feels like she owes something to people she can't quite recall. As for me, I still patrol Monongahela National Forest, but I approach abandoned mines differently now. I listen for sounds that shouldn't be there, and I pay attention when old-timers tell stories about the past. Because I learned something important down in Bloody Creek. The dead don't always rest easy, especially when they died for standing up to powerful people who tried to silence them. Last week I got a call about some missing hikers near an old copper mine up north. When I arrived at the search area, I could swear I heard the sound of pickaxes echoing from underground. Some debts can never be fully paid. Some injustices, chow through generations. And sometimes, if you listen carefully, you can hear the voices of people who died seeking nothing more than a fair day's pay for a fair day's work. The mine walkers are still out there, in places where workers died forgotten and unmarked. They're not evil. They're just trying to finish what they started when they were alive. If you ever hear mining sounds coming from a sealed mine shaft, don't ignore them. Listen. Remember. And maybe, if you're brave enough, help them find the justice they never got in life. Because we all owe something to the people who came before us, who died fighting for the rights we take for granted. The dead are patient, but they never forget. And neither should we. My name is Rebecca Thornfield, and I've been a park ranger for 12 years. Most people think that means I just drive around looking at pretty trees, but they're wrong. I'm a backcountry emergency medic, which means when people get hurt in places where helicopters can't land, I'm the one who goes in to get them. The Great Smoky Mountains can be beautiful, but they can also kill you faster than you'd think. Flash floods, bear attacks, falls from cliffs. I've seen it all. After 2 tours as an Army medic, I thought nothing could surprise me anymore. I was wrong about that, too. It was August 1979 when the Henderson family went missing. Tom and Sarah Henderson, their 8-year-old boy Jake, and Sarah's teenage daughter from her first marriage, Lisa. They'd gotten permits for a 5-day backpacking trip to Cataract Falls, way back in the Smoky Gap area. 16 miles from the nearest trail, no cell towers, no nothing. Just you, the mountains, and whatever's out there in the dark. The weather had been strange that summer. We'd had the worst drought in 50 years, then sudden storms would roll in out of nowhere. The old-timers said the mountains were angry, but I don't believe in that stuff. Weather is weather. Tom Henderson called in their trail plan like he was supposed to. Smart man, former Eagle Scout, knew the wilderness rules. They were heading to the hidden waterfalls that most tourists never see. Beautiful place, but dangerous. The Cherokee used to consider it sacred, and after what happened, I understand why. When they didn't check in on day 6, I got the call. Sarah was 7 months pregnant, which made this a medical emergency. If she went into early labor out there, she'd die. The baby, too. That gave us maybe 48 hours to find them before it became a recovery mission instead of a rescue. I packed my medical kit and enough supplies for a week. The FOUDS recast showed another storm system moving in, which meant flash flood conditions. If the Hendersons were camped near those waterfalls when the water came down, they'd be swept away like leaves. The hike-in was eerie from the start. I knew every trail in that section, but something felt wrong. The forest was too quiet. No birds, no squirrels, nothing. Even the insects had gone silent. My Army training kicked in. When nature shuts up, it means something's hunting. The drought had turned most of the creek beds into bone-dry ditches filled with white stones, but I could hear water running somewhere, which didn't make sense. I followed the sound for half a mile before realizing it was coming from above me, like the water was flowing uphill through the trees. That should have been my first warning to turn back. I found their first campsite at Devil's Backbone, a narrow ridge overlooking the valley. The Hendersons had followed the trail markers perfectly, but their camp was wrong. Not wrong like city people wrong. Wrong like someone had moved everything after they left. Their fire ring was built from white stones arranged in a perfect circle. Tom Henderson was an Eagle Scout. He knew you don't use limestone for fire rings. It can explode when heated. But these weren't just limestone. They were white as bleached bones and shaped well, like bones. I radioed back to headquarters, but got only static. The storm clouds were building, turning the sky dark green. I had maybe 3 hours before the rain hit. Following their trail deeper into the backcountry, I started finding strange things. Tom's hiking boots placed side by side on a fallen log like he'd taken them off to prey. Sarah's water bottle hanging from a branch 20 feet off the ground. No way she could have put it there, especially being pregnant. The weirdest thing was Jake's toy dinosaur. I found it sitting on a boulder in the middle of a dry creek bed surrounded by a circle of finger bones. Real bones, old ones, yellow with age. But mixed in were fresh ones, still pink with blood. I'm a medic. I know bones. These were human finger bones from at least 6 different people. Men, women, children. Some were old enough to be museum pieces. Others were so fresh they still had meat stuck to them. The rational part of my brain said maybe it was an old Cherokee burial ground. The mountains are full of them. Maybe some animal had dug up the remains and scattered them around. But no animal I knew could arrange bones in perfect circles. I heard crying coming from up ahead, a woman's voice, sobbing like her heart was breaking. It had to be Sarah Henderson. I ran toward the sound, crashing through the underbrush, following the trail markers deeper into Smoky Gap. But when I reached the source of the crying, there was nobody there. Just a spring bubbling up from between 2 white boulders, making a sound like weeping as the water trickled over the rocks. The spring hadn't been there on any of my previous trips to this area. I'd walked this exact spot dozens of times. Springs don't just appear overnight, especially not during the worst drought in 50 years. I knelt down to test the water with my kit. It was ice cold, which made sense for a mountain spring, but it smelled wrong. Not bad exactly, but old, like something that had been buried for a long time. When I looked up from my testing kit, there was a woman standing on the other side of the spring. She was tall and thin, wearing a long white dress that looked like it was made from some kind of animal hide. Her hair was black, shot through with white, braided with small bones and what looked like pearls. But it was her face that made my blood freeze. She looked like my grandmother might have looked if my grandmother had been Cherokee and dead for 100 years. Her skin was the color of old parchment, stretched tight over sharp cheekbones. Her eyes were the pale gray of limestone caves. "You're looking for the E family," she said. Her voice sounded like wind through dry leaves. I reached for my radio, but she held up one hand. Her fingers were long and white with fingernails like bone needles. "They're not hurt yet," she said, "but they will be if you don't understand." "Where are they?" I managed to ask. My medical training kicked in. Keep the patient talking, assess the situation, find a way to help. But she wasn't a patient. She wasn't even human. "They're collecting what was taken," she said, "what your people scattered to the winds." Then she was gone. Not walking away, not hiding behind a tree. Just gone, like smoke. I sat there for 5 minutes trying to convince myself I'd imagined the whole thing. Heat exhaustion, dehydration, stress, all good medical explanations for hallucinations. But the spring was still there, still bubbling and weeping. And floating on the surface of the water were dozens of small white bones, moving in slow circles like they were dancing. I followed the trail markers for another 2 miles, climbing higher into the mountains. The storm was getting closer. I could smell rain and electricity in the air, but the temperature was dropping too fast. It felt more like October than August. That's when I found their second campsite. The Hendersons' tent was still standing, but something was wrong with it. The fabric was bleached white, like it had been sitting in the sun for years instead of days. When I unzipped the door, the smell hit me like a punch. Death. Old death, mixed with something medicinal, like a hospital. Inside the tent, their sleeping bags were arranged in perfect rows, not scattered like people had slept in them, but lined up like hospital beds. At the foot of each sleeping bag was a small pile of bones, clean white bones, sorted by type. Finger bones in one pile, toe bones in another, ribs stacked like firewood. I'm a medic. I've seen plenty of skeletons in my training. These bones belonged to the Henderson family. I could tell by the sizes. Adult male, adult female, child, teenager. But they were too clean, too white, like they'd been boiled and bleached. The terrifying part was that these people were supposed to be alive. I heard voices outside the tent. Tom's voice, calling instructions about setting up camp, Sarah laughing at something, Jake asking if they were almost there. Normal family sounds. I crawled out of the tent fast, expecting to see them alive and well, ready to explain some reasonable reason for the bones in their tent. But there was nobody there. Just 4 sets of footprints in the dirt, leading away from the camp toward the waterfall. Fresh footprints made in the last few hours. Footprints with no weight behind them, pressed into the earth like shadows. I followed the trail, and that's when I saw my first clear look at the bone woman. She was walking maybe 50 feet ahead of me, moving through the forest like she owned it. And walking beside her, like a normal family on a normal hike, were the Hendersons. But they were wrong. They moved too smoothly, like they were floating an inch above the ground. Their clothes were the same bleached white as their tent. And when Tom turned to look back at me, I could see through his face to the trees behind him. They were ghosts, or they were becoming ghosts. The bone woman was collecting them, piece by piece. I tried to run after them, shouting for them to stop, to wait. But every step I took, they got farther away, even though they weren't moving any faster. It was like the forest was stretching between us. Finally, I lost them in a grove of white birch trees that I swear hadn't been there before. The trees were arranged in a perfect circle, their trunks pale as bone, their leaves white as snow even though it was still August. In the center of the circle was an old woman. Not the bone woman this time. This was a living person, ancient and wrinkled, wearing modern clothes and a Park Service hat. She was sitting on a folding chair beside a small fire like she was waiting for me. "You're the medic," she said when I approached. Her voice had a Cherokee accent, but she spoke perfect English. "My name is Mary Crow Feather. I'm a cultural interpreter for the Park Service." "How did you get here?" I asked. "This area is closed to visitors." "I've been here for 3 days," she said, "waiting for you." She gestured for me to sit on a log across from her fire. The flames were white instead of orange, burning without any visible fuel. "You need to understand what you're dealing with," Mary said. "The bone woman isn't evil. She's a healer. A medicine woman who died on the Trail of Tears." I'd heard about the Trail of Tears, the forced removal of Cherokee people from their lands in 1838. Thousands had died on the march west. "She collects the bones of people who die on sacred land," Mary continued. "She uses them to heal the damage done to Cherokee burial sites. But she's been getting stronger lately, more active. The drought disturbed something that should have stayed buried." "What about the Henderson family?" I asked. Mary's expression grew sad. "They camped directly on top of a mass grave. Cherokee families who died right here during the removal. The bone woman is trying to heal them by adding the Hendersons to her collection." "But they're still alive." "For now," Mary said. "But she's taking them apart piece by piece, adding their bones to the sacred arrangements. If you don't stop her soon, there won't be anything left to save." Thunder crashed overhead, and the first drops of rain began to fall. But the drops weren't water. They were small, white, and they made clicking sounds when they hit the ground. It was raining bones. Mary Crow Feather led me to a hidden cave system behind Cataract Falls. The waterfalls were running full now, even though there hadn't been enough rain to fill to hem. The water was milky white and smelled like old medicine. "She's in there," Mary said, pointing to a cave entrance behind the falling water. "With your family." "They're not my family." "They are now," Mary said. "You're the one who came to save them. That makes you responsible." The cave was like stepping into a cathedral made of bones. The walls were lined with human skeletons, but they weren't random. They were arranged in family groups, men, women, children, all standing together like they were posing for a picture. Cherokee families who had died during the Trail of Tears. But there were gaps in the arrangements, missing bones, broken connections. That's what the bone woman was trying to fix. I found the Hendersons in the deepest part of the cave. They were still alive, but barely. Tom was sitting against the cave wall, his legs faded to white bone from the knee down. Sarah was lying on a bed of white stones, her arms translucent, her pregnant belly glowing with strange light. Jake and Lisa were standing together, holding hands, their faces pale as marble. And working over them, like a surgeon in an operating room, was the Bone Woman. Up close, she was beautiful and terrible. 7 feet tall, wearing a dress made from white deerskin decorated with human teeth and finger bones. Her hair was white as snow, braided with the bones of children. Her hands were long and graceful, a healer's hands, but her fingernails were sharp as scalpels. "You came," she said when she saw me. Her voice was like wind through a graveyard. "The medicine woman." "I'm not a medicine woman, I'm just a medic." "Same thing," she said. "You heal the living, I heal the dead. But sometimes the line gets blurred." She gestured to the Henderson family. "They disturbed the sacred arrangements, slept on the bones of my people. The only way to heal the damage is to add them to the collection." "But they didn't know," I said. "They're innocent." "So were my people," the Bone Woman replied. "So were the children who died on the Trail of Tears. Innocence doesn't protect you from suffer." Beth. Sarah Henderson moaned in pain. Her labor was starting, triggered by whatever the Bone Woman was doing to her. "Let me help her," I said, pulling out my medical kit. "I can deliver the baby." "The baby will be part of the collection too," the Bone Woman said. "A new child to replace the children who were lost." I knelt beside Sarah, checking her pulse and breathing. Her vital signs were stable, but her legs were starting to fade like her husband's. Whatever the Bone Woman was doing, it was spreading. "There has to be another way," I said. "Some way to heal your people without killing this family." The Bone Woman studied me with those cave-gray eyes. "You are descended from soldiers," she said. "I can smell it on you. Your ancestors marched my people to their deaths." She was right. My great-great-grandfather had been an army medic during the Cherokee removal. I'd found his journal in my grandmother's attic, pages and pages of descriptions of the sick and dying Cherokee, and his frustration at not being able to help them. "My ancestor tried to help," I said. "He documented the suffering, tried to get medical supplies, protested the conditions, but he didn't stop it." "No," I admitted. "He didn't stop it." The Bone Woman nodded. "Then you understand the debt that must be paid." Sarah's contractions were getting stronger. The baby was coming whether we were ready or not. I had maybe 10 minutes to figure out how to save them all. That's when I understood. "You're not just collecting bones," I said. "You're trying to heal generational trauma. The damage done to your people is still bleeding, still hurting, even after all these years." "Yes," the Bone Woman said, "but adding more death won't heal that trauma. It'll just create more pain, more broken families." I opened my medical kit and pulled out my surgical tools. Not to fight her, but to offer them to her. "Let me help you heal the right way," I said. "Use my hands, my knowledge, my ancestors' debt. But let this family live. Let them be witnesses to what happened here instead of victims." The Bone Woman stared at the surgical instruments, then at me. "You would stay? Serve as healer to my people?" "Yes," I said, "as long as you need me." Sarah screamed. The baby was crowning. "Then heal them," the Bone Woman said, stepping back. "Show me your medicine." I delivered Sarah Henderson's baby in a cave full of Cherokee bones, with a 7-foot-tall spirit as my assistant. The baby was healthy, a little girl with bright eyes and strong lungs. When she cried, the sound echoed off the cave walls like a promise. The Bone Woman touched the baby's forehead with one bone-white finger. "She will remember," she said. "She will tell the stories." The Henderson family recovered completely. Tom's legs solidified back to flesh and bone. Sarah's strength returned. Jake and Lisa lost their ghostly pallor and became normal kids again, but they remembered everything. When we hiked out of the mountains 3 days later, after the storms had passed, they were different people, quieter, more respectful. Tom Henderson became a Cherokee rights activist. Sarah wrote a book about their experience that helped establish new protections for Native American sacred sites. The baby, when she grew up, became an anthropologist specializing in Cherokee history. Me? I kept my promise. I still work as a park ranger, but now I have additional duties. Once a month, I hike back into Smoky Gap to check on the Bone Woman and her collection. I bring medical supplies for the living Cherokee who come to pay their respects. I maintain the sacred sites. I make sure campers don't disturb the burial grounds. And sometimes when the moon is dark and the mist rises from the valleys, I help the Bone Woman with her work. Not collecting new bones, but arranging the old ones. Healing the broken connections between families that were torn apart so long ago. The Cherokee have a word for it. Duyuktuv. It means a right way, the way things should be. Balance between the living and the dead, between past trauma and present healing. I learned that medicine isn't just about fixing bodies. Sometimes you have to heal souls, communities, whole peoples. Sometimes the best way to treat the living is to honor the dead. The Park Service has no record of Mary Crow Feather. No Cherokee cultural interpreter by that name has ever worked for the park system. But sometimes, when I'm deep in the backcountry treating an injured hiker, I'll smell wood smoke and look up to see an old Cherokee woman watching me work, nodding in approval. If you ever go hiking in the Smoky Mountains, be careful where you camp. Research the history of the land, show respect for the sacred sites. And if you hear crying coming from a spring that wasn't there the day before, if you find circles of white bones in the forest, if you see a tall woman in white buckskin walking through the trees, don't run. Don't ignore her. Ask how you can help. Because the Bone Woman is still out there, still healing, still collecting what was scattered to the winds. And she's always looking for new medicine people to help her with the work. The dead have been waiting a long time for justice. The least we can do is help them find peace. My name is Rebecca Thornfield, and that's my story. Whether you believe it or not is up to you. But if you don't believe it, maybe you should ask yourself why Cherokee burial sites are still being discovered in the Smokies, why the arrangement of bones in these sites is always perfect, and why park rangers in that area have the lowest injury rates in the entire national park system. Maybe some spirits really do know how to heal. Maybe some debts really do need to be paid. Maybe some stories really are true.